This is Hawaii News Now Sunrise.
And joining us now is veteran diplomat, U.S. Ambassador Joseph Yoon, joining us this morning to talk about the U.S. ROK relationship. Good to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to come to Hawaii.
Yeah, and we understand that you came from a very important role recently over in Korea. Can you explain a little bit about how that plays into the larger relationship?
Sure, of course. So I've been a U.S. diplomat for something like 40 years, much too long for me to even think about it. So I actually retired. But as you recall, exactly a year ago, there was a martial law declaration in Korea, and there was a huge gap with U.S. ambassador, who's a good friend, leaving. So at the end of last year, I would say December, they asked me to go back to Korea and head the embassy as the acting ambassador. So I was there from early January this year till about 3 weeks ago. So about 10 months I was there. And so it was really to work on transitions. What would happen to previous President Yoon Suk-yeol, because he was impeached. And then, of course, there was another transition in Washington that is going from Biden to Trump. So I was there for the past 10 months during, a little bit of trying times, Annalisa.
I think you are that's an understatement, considering all the kind of news that came out of Korea with, again, we covered that whole transition, a very tough one from President Yoon. And right now, are you feeling that change over that transition has affected our relationship?
Of course, each time there is a transition in heads of state, it's going to affect the relationship. In Korea, what happened was previous President Yoon was a center-right president representing conservative parties. And then in President Lee Jae-myung, they were going to center-left parties. But as you know, the relationship between the United States and South Korea is fundamentally based on alliance. So U.S. guarantees South Korean security, especially vis-a-vis North Korea. So we have, of course, 28,000 troops there, huge commitments there. So where is the new president in terms of his views on the alliance, his views on North Korea, and of course, more these days, his views on China is very important. So try to align what's happening in Washington to the changes in Korea. That's the important task.
And when we talk about the alliance, this is, like as you mentioned, more than 70 years, really built on the backbone after the Korean War, military focused. But we're seeing a shift, aren't we, toward more of economic security versus defense and the war rhetoric.
Right.
How important is that?
We have obviously gone into strategic competition with China. So it is crucially important for Washington that our allies and our friends view the world in a like-minded manner, especially regarding China. So I would say in those terms, military security competition is huge, but growing. You cannot separate economic competition. We've now recently seen how damaging it can be. For example, when China denies rare earth, it can be very denying because we depend so much on that kind of supply chain. So how do we think about protecting ourselves on economic security? Rare earth is an example. So is competition over things like semiconductors. So is competition over energy, the competition over AI. So because those are all becoming very much integrated with our security side. So where is Korea? As it, there has been tremendous growth in Korean economy, Korean technology. So Korea contributes, as does countries like Japan, major way in our what we call secure supply chain. So you're very much right. The competition very much extends to the economic area, and how we go about getting them, let's face it, simply on our side to think as we do. Or there is a lot of we need to also understand what Korean concerns are, because China is Korea's largest trading partner, and we cannot just say cut off all trade. So how do we manage that in a way that the alliance remains secure, but we are strategically in a similar position?
Yeah, as you mentioned, you have to maintain that very strong economic relationship with China when you're talking with Korea. But what about the policies that we've seen under the current administration, Trump administration, in terms of tariffs, some of these harsher America First policies?
There's no question. Tariffs are a big headache for our allies and friends. But I think at the same time, they must understand tariff is a very, very important tool to control trade, to control flows, and to deal with China. But more than that, it's also a problem for the United States to have such huge trade deficits. And we have to do something about trade deficits. Trade deficit in the U.S., I think it's close to $1 trillion. I mean, we say trillion, and for most people it is meaningless. But that's a huge part of our economy. And so we have to get trade deficit in order, and tariffs is a tool. And U.S. can be stronger if we have domestic economy under control. To do that, we have to control our trade deficit.
Okay, well, and we did talk about boosting the focus on manufacturing here, domestic manufacturing, and there's been a lot of talk about partnering. There are very many ways that America is partnering with South Korea, specifically in shipbuilding. There's been talk about the nuclear submarine and a lot of these investments here to boost our maritime structure and shipbuilding. What do you make of that? Is that really the right move, and how feasible is it that this is going to really happen?
So, first, the United States really must get better and quickly on shipbuilding. U.S. now has probably about less than 5% of the world shipbuilding capacity. It's been eroded. Now, you're in Hawaii. You know how important shipping is. I talked with Admiral Paparo the other day, and he's very keen that the Navy must have more ships, more capacity in all aspects, both in warship, transportation ship, icebreakers, and so on. So, but current U.S. capacity simply cannot handle it. And that is a long history. And so South Korea is world's number 2 producer of shipbuilding, ships. And so we need that capacity. One way to do it is for South Koreans to buy existing shipyards in the United States. For example, recently, South Korean company Hanwha bought Philly Shipyard in Philadelphia. And so they could produce ships there, and it would be made in the U.S. Similarly, on automobiles, U.S. also must get better quickly on automobiles, is for South Korean companies as well as Japanese and Western European countries to build manufacturing facilities. and they're doing that. And that's then made in the United States. Same thing with semiconductors. Whether it's Taiwan, TSMC, Korean, Samsung, they can come to the United States to build it. That way, we have technology, we have capacity, and so we rely less on imported goods. And also, what that means is that our trade deficit will ultimately go down. So, that is part of technology, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, Democrats or Republicans, is completely agreed that is the right strategy. So, these things take time.
I feel like
And-
we've been talking about it for a while already,
A while.
though. So what's different now?
I think different now is there is more a sense this has to get done earlier. We have to accelerate it
Because of China?
because of China. Yes, and you know we simply cannot rely on China to provide materials, goods, technology. I mean, this is tough things to say. I've been working with China for a long time, and so the values are different, ambitions are different. It is clear that China no longer want to accept the kind of post-war order, I would say, systems, institutions, rule of law that we depended so much on. So, we talked about the economy. China has been building up their capacity, subsidizing state-owned companies, and also we've had a lot of problems on intellectual property where American companies will invest, but then they need local partners, then protection of whatever technology U.S. companies bring, or it could be Korean, Japanese companies, are no longer protected. And so that's been a problem for a long time. And this is why, we have lost so much edge in competing with China.
And also the relationships China has built in Southeast Asia, across the Pacific, right? Those economic partnerships. Well, I don't know if you would call them partnerships, but
I think
the way they've moved into the territories.
I think you're right. 2 years ago, well, actually now I think it's 3 years ago, I helped negotiate. I was the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for compact negotiations. Compacts deal with 3 countries in this area we have very close special relationships with. They're Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau. And so every 20 years, the compact agreements expire and we have to renew it. And one of the reasons that we need this compact agreement is, let's face it, because of China. China has made significant inroads. Look at places like Solomon Islands,
When they're offering money and
Exactly.
investment.
They're
and-
offering huge amounts of money. So our goal is to protect really, northern, I would say Pacific, going from Hawaii, all that line to Guam. And those are the compact countries, Palau, Micronesia, Marshall Islands. So we have to maintain closest possible relations with them. And to do that, we needed to renew the compact agreements.
It makes sense. And, again, we often talk about the military security aspect of all of these relationships in this region. But as you explained, the economic has become so much more important. And I think the bottom line, what is the takeaway going forward? Are we moving in the right direction in getting these investments off the ground? I mean, when I was based in the Philippines and in Singapore, there was a lot of criticism that the U.S. was not doing enough to invest, to really, show the allies there that they were behind them. And that's why, and some people blame that's why China became as strong as it did at the time. You know, look what happened in the Philippines with
I-
those islands. Yeah?
I think you're completely right. We really have neglected what I would call global South relationship for at least 2-3 decades. And so what happened, in my view, after the Cold War, is we moved into a little bit of what I call unipolar world, where U.S. dominated from, during the 1990s, 2000s, and we made some mistakes. I would count, the war in Iraq as one of them. Certainly massive involvement in Afghanistan. We can look back on it. And then so there was a period, still remains, a period of retrenchment. How do we balance the massive investments, we've had? And then we were a little bit late in realizing the importance of Asia. And
Some would argue we still haven't realized it.
Well,
Because there's so much focus on Venezuela, what's
exactly.
happening in that region.
But now I think we're beginning to correct that. It started, really, I would say, towards the end of Obama administration, correcting it, especially reviewing relations with China. If you remember, 30 years ago, we would talk about China as making China one of key stakeholders. Let's bring them into our fold, and they will be, a stakeholder. That hasn't worked.
No. Xi Jinping will not
Yeah.
let that
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, that has not worked.
Yeah.
So we now have to compete. It is a competitor. It's an economic competitor, strategic competitor, security competitor. And so we now need to gear up towards that. And so that competition is becoming global. I think you saw, was in September or early October, President Xi having all his friends and heads of state over, and you could see the picture of Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, kind of three leading the charge.
The new order that you mentioned, changing the order.
And so this is particularly acute on the Korean Peninsula because we have huge U.S. presence. We have a nuclear armed North Korea who are very much aligned with Russia and China. Korea still remains, of course, a divided country. Same people, same language, same culture, but divided since 1945. So internally, within the peninsula, that's a problem. How do people think about it? How do South Koreans think about North Korea? What do they think about Kim Jong-un?
Under this new administration, it swung back to a little bit of more, I don't want to say reconciliation, but maybe more outreach.
I think reconciliation is the correct
Is the correct
word.
term?
Yeah.
So it is
Yeah.
swung that far.
Yeah, it
'Cause
is- it
under
is-
President Yoon, it was the other way. Yeah.
So Koreans, really for them, define whether you're conservative or progressive based on views on North Korea or security, And in the United States, very few people will vote on foreign policy basis alone, right? It's mostly about economy, culture, values, and so on. But in Korea, North Korea is very important how people will vote. And so when you have center-left government, you're going to have a government, as you say, much more interested in engagement, much more interested in steps towards reconciliation, much more interested in providing economic assistance to North Korea, while if you have a center-right government, they're much more interested in competing with North Korea in terms of security, military and force posture.
Okay, so you think that this administration under President Lee is equipped to move forward with President Trump? Like they're both in line. There's an alignment in policy and approach.
I think there is certainly in line with President Trump in wanting to engage North Korea.
Oh, but I went to those two summits with President Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore and in Hanoi. And, to this day, I don't really know what came out of those two summits. I think a lot of us reporters that covered that felt like it was a little bit more of a kind of photo opportunity as opposed to actual change or improvement.
It's interesting you say that. Of course, I'm a diplomat. I believe in engagement. I believe in talking. I mean, it's easy to talk with friends and people who think like you. In the end, you agree, you go home, But I think it's more important to talk to parties, nations that you disagree with, that you want to fight with. Adversaries, exactly. And so to me, even though you're right that really nothing substantive was achieved by the two summit meetings, in Singapore and Hanoi, I think they were good in themselves because each side got to know each other a little bit more, what their grievances are. Has it fundamentally changed the picture? I would say no, but that's also because we live in democracy. And so governments and policies will change. And of course, after the two summit, we had the Biden administration not very interested in engaging with North Korea. So I do think without talking to them, you really don't know at the moment why North Koreans are not willing to seriously engage with South Korea or with the United States. But ultimately, opening channels, talking to them is the way to go.
Okay, well, I was hoping for a little less concern because we are in Hawaii, and as you know, the ballistic missile mishap, that failed announcement that everyone received here, just underscored the concern about how we are in the middle of this kind of very tense situation. Even when, we get reports of Russia ships in the region also, right? So
Hawaii is most definitely, I would say, in the front line, if not the front line. I think the front line is probably the Korean Peninsula, but Hawaii, Guam, I mean, you have so much, a Pacific Command infrastructure here. And if there is to be any contingency in Asia, it would be the job of our soldiers and seamen, from Hawaii that needs to help out. You mentioned what happened with the missiles. So I was at the time special envoy for North Korea in 2018, and I get a report saying missiles are headed to Hawaii, and I said, "Holy moly!" And very quickly that was taken back, saying it was misinformation. And so I got to thinking, what happens if it was the other way around, that some soldier, looking at his terminal, saw that missiles were headed, American missiles were headed to Pyongyang, and they probably don't have the backup systems that we have, and they could very well have reacted differently. And so this kind of mishap is what I worry most about, starting a new military war, disaster. if you have some lines of communications, if someone could have got on the phone and say, hey, what on earth going on? Are you shooting at us? Then, the other side said, what are you talking about? Without those backup human level contact, relying on machines alone is very, very dangerous. And I worried at the time if it happened the other way around, North Koreans could have reacted very differently.
Do you think there is a place for nuclear weapons on the peninsula and the South Korea side?
Obviously, nobody wants nuclear weapons anywhere. If there were no nuclear weapons at all by anyone, that would be the best possible outcome, right?
Yeah. But
But
that's not the reality.
That's dreaming.
Okay.
That is dreaming. I remember President Obama declared a big policy of, world free of nuclear weapons. It's aspirational, hope, but it's not realistic.
And then you point to what happened in Ukraine.
But you then with nuclear weapons, you're always going to get imbalance. As you mentioned, Ukraine is a case in point. Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons, but I think it was 2007. They gave up nuclear weapons with sovereignty, territorial guarantee by three parties, including Russia. Russia, U.S., and U.K. essentially said, we will maintain territorial integrity and your independence and sovereignty. And so they gave up nuclear weapons, and look what happened.
Yeah.
Now, I do worry that South Korean situation is quite imbalanced. North Korea probably has anywhere between 70 and 100 nuclear weapons. South Korea has none. And
But
so
you have the military presence there.
you have the military presence of the United States and what we call extended deterrence. That is a nuclear umbrella of the United States. But for a lot of South Koreans are thinking, given that North Korea now has missiles that can reach Hawaii, LA,
Wow.
I live in Portland, Oregon, what happens if North Koreans threaten the United States? Do not intervene, otherwise Honolulu will go down, So that's what they worry about. Will U.S. truly provide extended deterrence, nuclear umbrella, that is necessary? That is why in South Korea, about 70%, according to opinion polls, now support what's indigenous nuclear weapons. And of course, we really don't want proliferation of nuclear weapons. They're dangerous in themselves. But South Korean, those who support nuclear weapons are justifying, look, we need balance. Look at, for example, South Asia, where Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons. I think about a month or 2 months ago, there was skirmish between Pakistan and India, but they de-escalated very rapidly because they do not want to go to that option, that nuclear option. They do not want to inflame the situation. So in some sense,
It works.
it works. And really, look at the Cold War. U.S. and Soviet Union, both with huge nuclear weapons, never went to war with each other, And so anyway, nobody wants nuclear weapons around, but the same thing, with any armament, you gotta have balance, and that's what South Koreans, what public is saying.
Yeah.
But still, U.S. really does not want nuclear weapons, indigenous nuclear weapons in South Korea, and so that's a situation that has to be managed skillfully.
Yeah, they feel like the deterrence of the military presence there should be enough. right? All these extended.
Who is they?
The U.S. does.
I think
Right?
that is very much
They feel
the
like
case.
that's enough to
Yeah.
deter.
So I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail
Yeah.
on this, but like halfway house, they're saying, look, if we can enrich uranium, reprocess certain amount, so that we have our civilian nuclear side, their feedstock, so kind of similar capacity as Japan has. And so that's what South Koreans want. It's called latency, you know? And so the difference is that if, for civilian nuclear feedstock, you need about 20% uranium enrichment. To get the weapons grade, is over 90%. So doing it up to 20%, Koreans think they need it for domestic industry, but also maybe just in case it needs to be enriched further to have weapons grade. So that's the kind of discussion that will continue for a while, I believe.
Yeah, that's not something that we're going to see fixed anytime soon, I believe. But anyway, this was such a wonderful discussion, Ambassador Yoon. Just, I guess, any last thoughts as we move into the new year? You know, we just saw APEC. We saw the first meeting between President Trump and President Lee. What should we look out for? What should we, I guess, prepare ourselves for?
I think we should look at the relationship between the United States, the Trump administration led United States, and the Asia Pacific countries. Are they going to, build the building blocks so that the support is there from the Asia Pacific partners for us to deal with China, North Korea's threat? So that's the basic thing. And I think Hawaii is uniquely positioned to be the center of that activity. I'm very impressed each time I come to Honolulu to look at, Indo-PACOM Command here, to look at your institutions like University of Hawaii, East-West Center, and so that there's so much thinking going on. And also, places like APCSS. I think these are great places to begin to, to be the center of activity between the United States and Asia Pacific.
And on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Ambassador Joseph Yoon joining us today. And if I could sum it up, I would say, show me the money. All right. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time here on Hawaii News Now.